Before starting, I want to know by raising your hand, how many of you have ever set up continuous delivery for one of their projects? Quite a lot. By raising your hand again, how many of you took more than 1 day to set up it? All right. What if I tell you you can set up continuous integration and delivery under 1 day? Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes? All right. I am Jean L'Heureux. I work at App Veyor. I'm a tech evangelist and demo engineer. And one of my recent projects was to integrate App Veyor for Sidecar inside the Habitat demo that you all know. So I wanted to avoid the errors of the past demos that we had called Jetstream, because this one was made without control source, directly on the production server, with only some backups in case things go wrong. And no wonder why nobody wanted to update that demo in the last 4 years. So I wanted to get things right this time, to enable all the developers on my team to edit that demo and improve it year after year and month after month without having the fear to break anything. So that's why I got interested in continuous integration and delivery. And after spending about a week using one of the most popular tools out here, it didn't work, and I began looking somewhere else to fulfill my needs. And I stumbled on App Veyor. Under 4 hours, I was able to have my build and my unit test passing, and I was amazed. So I worked with that tool to do the delivery as well. So before going further, I will start a demo, and then we will talk about App Veyor later while the build is going on. So my setup is like this on my computer right now. I have my Habitat files in my dev root, and I have my Sidecar instance separately in my web root. When I change one file in my dev root, I have gulp scripts that listens to the changes and send the files to my web root automatically. And when I change an item in my web root, I have Unicorn that sends the items serialized in my dev root. Very simple. So I will go ahead and do a modification in my application. So here is my dev root with the default layout for my demo. So if I had some text and I save, that file is automatically deployed to my web root. Here in my browser, I have the experience editor of my web root. If I refresh the page, you will see at the top left corner that I will have my new Hello SUGCON here, right here. So that was working. Now if I change any item, like this carousel item here, and I change it for SUGCON Rocks, I will also modify the carousel itself and change which carousel slides it has. And I will remove all the slides except the first one I just modified, so it won't spin. And I save. Now I have one slide and with my modification. Back to my dev root, if I check the git status, I have that simplicity Unicorn item that was modified. I have the value of my title that is modified, as well as the slides themselves that are stored in the carousel.yml file, which slides are there. So I will stage both of those files, as well as my layout change, and commit that as a SUGCON demo commit. Then in my terminal, I git push, and I expect App Veyor to start building my project right now. So when the push is done, I can go back to my browser, visit my GitHub project that is public, you can access it, and we can see my latest commit here with our changes. If I check App Veyor, it already started to do my build. It's queued right now, but in a few seconds it will start. It has. So it starts by cloning my Git repo. It will check out my commit, and it will build my project. Very, very simple. But how I get there is what I will show you just now. Oh. So what is App Veyor? It's a complete continuous integration and delivery project solution that can be hosted in the cloud. That's the default mode of it. And a few months ago, they added the enterprise version that you can install in your premises if you'd like. But the most used for App Veyor is the hosted version. It's free for open source projects, and it starts at $30 per month for private projects if you'd like. It's a Windows and Microsoft Stack first solution. So it has all the nice things you expect to have to build your projects, to run the unit test, as well as to go way beyond with Docker. You can have IIS, MongoDB, SQL Server directly in your build machine if you need them. If you don't, they are there anyway for you. It has a lot of other tools as well. For 2 months now, they offer also a Linux environment in beta. So it has .NET Core and PowerShell Core to build the .NET Core projects, basically. So you can build separately in Windows and Linux for your projects. So to get started with App Veyor, it's really, really simple. You sign up with your GitHub or any other source control account, and you create a new project at the top left. So, yeah. It supports the 4 main source control solutions out there, as well as their enterprise versions like this, and any Git Mercurial or Subversion repository, basically. If it's accessible from the internet, it can build it. Then in your project, when you log in, you have access to all those repositories. You choose the one you want to create a project for, and you're good to go. You have the settings UI where you can change all the settings for your build. But by default, App Veyor is able to build your project without any setting. That's what's magic with it. So the UI is very simple to use. You don't need access to the documentation that much because everything is straightforward. There's help bubbles where you can need help. And it's very good because at the end, when you finished using the UI, you can generate an appveyor.yml file with that. What I like about that file is that the file is committed in your repository and is available for all your contributors. So if anybody makes a fork of your project, it has the basic file and it can use App Veyor as well with your settings to build their branches. So that's very good for sharing and caring in the open source world. It's always accessible, even offline. You work on the plane, you have access to all your build steps and your deployment steps in a single file, so you can make change, and when you have internet connection, you commit, and that's it. Every commit triggers a new build as well, because it's like a commit in the files. So I like that very much. So the configuration file, what do you need to put in to get started? The answer is nothing. With a blank configuration file that just exists in your repo, App Veyor is able to build the first solution or project it finds in your repo. It will auto-detect the unit test assemblies and try to run the unit test inside that. That might break depending on the complexity of your project, but it's just to tell that it's very, very simple to get started with. Normally, you will add some basic structure to your file. Since it's a YAML file, the structure and the spaces are very important. So you will tell App Veyor to build your project of choice, to do something before or after the build. Here I restored NuGet packages, and you specify which Visual Studio base install you want. 2013 to 2017 are supported. After that, you get a nice console with the build of your project, and you can see the history of your builds on the next tab. Very, very simple. So the build pipeline of App Veyor is in 5 phases. First, there's the initialization of the build. Then it builds the solution. It runs the unit test. And after that, it deploys your packages if you have. So that's not mandatory. You do it if you'd like. At the end of the deploy, there's a finalize file step where there's some cleanup and final scripts. So in the init phase, everything in bold is done automatically by App Veyor for you. So it will clone your repository, it will check out the commit, it will start the build cache, it restores it, and then everything else, you have the chance to create scripts or configure that. So you can put some scripts before it clones, after it clones in the install section. You can modify the assembly info file before building. You can put some host names and start some services. Then in the build phase, there's always before and after in the build itself. The build can be automatic with a solution that will use MS Build to build it, or you can put your own build script if you'd like, if you have custom build solution. If you have new spec files along with your projects, it will automatically build the NuGet packages for you and send them in a feed for your project and your account, so you can use those NuGet packages elsewhere in other projects. Very clever. Then there's the test. Same thing, before, after, and the test or test scripts. It auto-discovers them if you don't put anything in there. And after that, before the deployment phase, there's a build success and artifacts creation phases that you can also configure. In the deploy, it's very simple. Before, after, and deploy itself, it can use some providers or some scripts, what you prefer. And at the end, for successful or failed builds, it will run some steps for you to put scripts in there to do something else in case of a success or a failure. So I won't talk about all those steps, but the main ones are in my talk. Once you've started and you have your first build running, then you notice that the NuGet packages takes a long time to install. If you are using Node.js with Node packages, also this gets long to install. So it's good to improve the performance of your build to use a cache. So App Veyor is, you can configure the cache. You put some folder names that you want to be cached, and it will cache them. You can do a single folder, as I have on line 2. On line 3, there's a dependency. So if any of the packages.config file is changed in my repository, the cache is invalidated, and then it runs the step again for this folder. Or it will recache the end result at the end. And if you have to use some environment variables, then you can add some quotes around the line itself. When the cache is used, you see I have cache restored in my build log, and at the end, I will have cache updates. Once you get the build done, it's time for running the unit test. So if the default behavior for running the unit test is not applicable for your project, you can always specify which assemblies you want to unit test. So you can configure that, run all the something test.dlls in my output of my project, for example. When you have unit tests running, you have a unit test report on the test tab that lists all the failed and success tests. If there's a failed test, then the build, of course, is stopped there, and there's no deploy when the tests are not passing. So sometimes your project requires your SUGCON license to be built, or some secrets and internal tools, or something that you don't want public to be have access to, and especially when you are building open source projects. So how do you store those secret informations and access them while you don't want also them to be available in the build log, because this is also publicly available? App Veyor thought about that and created something called Secure File. Secure File is a NuGet package. It's a tool that you call to encrypt some files, and you will commit those encrypted files in your repository. So nobody will be able to decrypt them. You keep the secret. So you first have to encrypt your stuff on your computer. So you will install secure file on the first line, and then tell it to encrypt the license.xml with your encryption key. Then on the App Veyor side, you have to store also that encryption key somewhere. So you can put it in an environment variable so nobody will see it in your build logs, and it will be kept secret. You can do it in the settings UI, even if you are using the YML file for configuration. The settings are, the environment variables, sorry, are one of the only thing that is merged between the UI and the config file. But if you have a config file, usually it ignores everything you set in the UI here. Or you can put it in directly in your file. So there's a concept of secure variables. So this is not my encryption key. It's a base 64 encrypted representation of my encryption key. So we need to go deeper here. So those secure variables are nice because they are as secure as environment variables in the UI. In fact, it's in the environment section for an environment variable. But it tells your contributors that there's something they need to change if they are forking your repo. So they will have to generate their own license encryption key and encrypt their own license to put it in their branches, for example. The way to create those secure variables is a tool. Once you're logged in App Veyor, you put the value to encrypt, you call encrypt, and you put that in your config. Very, very easy. And then some tips. Your key needs to be long enough for it to be secure, of course. It needs to be less than 33, anyway, that number of characters, because all the encryption, all the environment variables needs to fit in that amount of data. So you don't encrypt a full file content, put it in the environment variables and use it as is. I learned that the hard way. Avoid some special characters because your key will be used in command lines or PowerShell scripts. So if there's some special things, it might end the string unexpectedly. And the character, for some reason, is removed by App Veyor when you set it from the UI. So don't use it. I don't know. So in your install script, you will need to install secure file as well, and you need to decrypt your license using your environment variable. So that will create the license.xml file in your folder, basically. And you will be able to use it for your build or unit test. An example of the configuration. So I did it for Habitat repo. So this is my complete continuous integration configuration. So I have Visual Studio 2017. I have my secure file for my license. I have also some caches for Node.js and NuGet. In my install section at the top right, I do my installation of Node.js because Habitat requires version 6. It doesn't work with version 8. So I have to change the default Node.js version that App Veyor uses. I do npm install and install gulp to run the custom build scripts already there with the Habitat repository. I patch my assembly info files, and I also decrypt my license. So instead of using the standard MS build of habitat.solution, I use a custom build script to do a custom task I created that just do less steps than the basic task that tries to publish to a web root, where here I don't have any IIS, any SQL, any Sitecore. It builds just for the dev root. I test only my project test, and I added some notifications just to have a notification in Slack when the build is done and when the packaging deployment is done as well. So this is my custom function for gulp. It just restores NuGet packages and build the solution in debug. So the reason I build in debug is because this is the only target that builds the unit test assemblies, so I need them to run my unit test. Then when the build and the test are passing, it's time to package everything for deployment. App Veyor is able to package artifacts for all those type of files for Azure and so on. And you can also package standard zip files, or you can set file for anything other than a zip and those. Or you can put automatic as the type for your artifacts, and App Veyor will check the extension and choose which type it is. So different types got deployed to different services, of course. When you create your artifacts, you have 7-zip available on the build machine, so you can package more than one file together to create the artifact of your choice. And if you have new spec files with your projects, then they will be automatically packaged and added to the project and account field, as I mentioned earlier. To declare the artifacts, it's really, really easy. In the artifact section, you put the path of the file you want to be kept after the build, and a name for it that would be used later for deployments. I didn't put any type. It was auto-detected as a zip file by App Veyor here. So when you have artifacts, they are listed in the artifacts section, and you can download them, inspect them, and as I mentioned, use them in the deployments. So deployments work with either inline or environments. Inline, it's the build machine that will do the deployment for you. So it's synchronous. After the build, it starts deploying directly. It doesn't have to use the artifacts. It can use the local build DLLs and files if you'd like. But it allows two types of deployments from script and the local deployments as well. So you can deploy to a local IIS directly on the build machine as a first step to run integration test, and then you can deploy to another server afterwards if the integration tests are passing, for example. While environment is asynchronous, so it starts a deploy job and it gets run a few seconds after the build has finished. So it has separate logs. It uses the artifacts. It's mandatory to package your things in artifacts to use them. And it allows a deployment agent. So it's a small software you install on any server that will listen for deploy jobs that App Veyor pushes to it. You can repeat also the deployments. So it's a good thing for reverting to a previous build in case there was a deployment problem or a build problem, so you can roll back using that. That's one of the main advantages. To where you can deploy, it's up to you, it's your imagination. You can deploy to all those Azure and Amazon services. You can deploy directly in the GitHub releases and so on. So as I mentioned, in an environment deployment, you can use the agent, and inline you can use a script local, and now Octopus deploy for a few weeks, they support that tool as well. So for those of you who already use it. This is an example of an Azure cloud service deployment. So it can be complex or very easy depending on what the deployment service asks for secrets and configuration. So it's just, again, some config in the file, and it will automatically deploy to the service of your choice. So once you have, this is the environments. So instead of inline, you can choose to deploy to an environment. You have to create it first. So you go in the Environments tab at the top in the middle, and you create a new environment. You choose the provider, so it's the same list of providers that I showed earlier, but it has the App Veyor agent as well in the middle here. You set up the provider settings as well as environment variables for that environment. And one thing to note is that in the provider settings, it's the name of your archives for your artifact name and dot one of the settings. So habitat deployment archive.path is where the zip will be extracted on my target environment, for example. You choose the projects where environments can be run. So if you have multiple projects and each have their own environments, that's fine. And you can choose notifications and permissions for those environments as well. So to configure an environment deployment is easy as setting the provider to environment and setting the name of that environment to be run. So you have all the history of the deployments. You can, if you hover over one, you can publish that artifacts or replay that deployment on your server, for example. You may have noticed my Slack notification. It says that my continuous integration is completed. Now I will have my deployment starting in a moment. So we will wait for the deployment to be done before checking out our solution. I will maybe show you something. So here only the integration is done. Before I forget, I will open my habitat staging.local. So this is also on my machine, but that's my staging SUGCON instance, and you notice that it has the full carousel with all the slides, and it doesn't have the header I had set up prior. So when the deployment will be done, it will be done on that environment, and we will be able to see the changes. So that's it, it's done. This is Catlight, another software that listens for App Veyor deployments or any other provider like Travis CI and also Octopus and things like that. So when inspecting one of the deployment, you have two things, the deployment itself for the App Veyor agent here, and the name of my machine, WKS something, which is the build script, the deploy script logs. So the first one is running on App Veyor. It just sends the artifacts to all the agents that are listening for this project. And the second one is what happened on my target machine for deployments. So for deploying Habitat, what I did was first on the App Veyor build virtual machine, I had to do something to package my DLLs and files and also unicorn items. So first, I build in release in a temp folder instead of building directly and publishing to my web root because I don't have a web root. I copy some environment-specific files for really for staging or production, for example. I can have multiple targets environments. And I generate a SUGCON update package using SUGCON Courier, which is an amazing tool. I like it. Then in a script phase, after build, I would zip all the update package, a PowerShell script, and 2 ASPX files as tools for my build, and all of that will be my artifact. So this will be zipped together, put in the artifact, and I launch the Habitat staging environment for my deployment. Then the package, my artifact is sent to the App Veyor agent that's running on my computer right now. And that agent, it received the artifact, unzip it where I tell it to unzip using the settings in the UI I showed before. And then it runs the deploy.ps1 file automatically. I don't have to create some script for it. Inside this script, I decided to call my 2 ASPX files. The first one installs all the packages in a special location automatically. And the second one is publishing everything from master to web. So those two files were created by Alexander Doroshenko, and I use them as is, as well as SUGCON Courier. Then I call the home page to warm it up because I don't want to wait for it to be ready. And it deletes the package the ASPX file and itself, so it cleans the deployment folder by itself. So in the end, the config to create that looks like this. First, at the top, in the init section, before the repo gets cloned and everything, I run a little bit of script in PowerShell to determine if it's a regular commit or if it's a tag in GitHub, GitLab, or VSTS, I think. So if this is a tag, I will deploy in production. If this is a regular commit, I will deploy in staging, build and deploy, in fact. So remember my build script to build in debug, same tests. And after the tests are passed, then I rebuild in release to have a release build. And I generate the SUGCON Courier update package using the first line here, line 20. And at line 22, I just zip my update package with the script and the 2 ASPX files for that environment. So I can have a different script for different environments, production or staging if I'd like. On the right side, I create that artifact, and I use a deploy with my environment provider. Deploy can have conditions. So here I will deploy only if this is my App Veyor branch and my deploy environment is staging. Deploy environment here is an environment variable I created in the init section. So you can use arbitrary variables you create yourself as well. We had the notification it was completed. So I will show you again the staging part. If I reload my Habitat staging, now we have the hello SUGCON message, and we still have the 4 slides. So this part didn't work. I don't know how, but at least we have the header, so something went wrong. The demo gods were against me. This is the gulp file. It's pretty small, maybe at the back, but basically I just added a few tasks in there to enable my custom deployment because there was already some task made by Thomas in here. So everything that is not fade out is what I added. So I do tell all the tasks to use the temp folder as the build folder, and then I added some files to remove from it, like the unicorn files, DLLs, and unit testing assemblies and things like that. And then I copy over all the YML files for unicorn serialization over to my temp folder, and I call at the end here, I called SUGCON Courier, which is using a separate file here. I call the SUGCON Courier executable, and then it just creates my update package. Those are my 2 environments, production and staging. The only difference is just a different patch to target hostname. So with that, I can deploy 2 different environments with different setups. And this is my deploy.ps1 file that got executed on my server. And this one is just calling the 3 pages. So it calls first install package, publish, and then a warm-up page, which is the home page, just to have it ready. And it deploys, deletes everything at the end. So a big thanks to Alexander. He is the author of SUGCON Courier and the deployment helpers ASPX pages I'm using. It really helped me to get that project done in a short amount of time. Make sure to see his presentation tomorrow about using a new thing called SUGCON Flow, which is using Microsoft Flow to automate some tasks between SUGCON and other systems. Also, what's next for me using App Veyor? First, I want to make the build faster. Right now, it takes about 25 to 30 minutes to build and deploy. This is mainly because of the large number of projects recorded by Elix here. So if I can take the Elix FX Cup helpers to have only fewer projects, but but stricter rules in my code that will help the build process, because continuous integration, the goal is to have a quick feedback on your development and not to go too deeper before you know you have break the build or something like this. I also want to add deployments when I tag a commit on GitHub, so deploy in production. And I would like those deployments to be done on Azure web apps. So instead of on my local machine, I could use a different provider for deployment in production. I also want to do a fresh Sitecore instance per new deployment. So install Sitecore using CIF, and also install WFFM and just deploy from scratch every time. That would be better. If you want to learn more about App Veyor, visit their website. You have access to my repository as well. It's public, so you can see my examples, and you can follow the project as it will evolve. I will continue to improve it in the next months. And I will also write a few blog posts about all of this. Didn't want to spoil my presentation, so the blog posts are coming, either on my own blog or on Coveo blog. And speaking about Coveo, I have a few colleagues here, Simon, Eder, and Seamus, that are here. If you want to learn more about Coveo, what we do, basically we do search inside Sitecore for the visitors using machine learning and everything. So if you want to learn more, just spot me or ask one of my colleagues. And I'm always on Twitter and Slack as well, so you know where to find me. Tomorrow, there will be a presentation about Docker to deploy Sitecore, so tomorrow morning. And tomorrow afternoon, there's the Sitecore install extensions that work with CIF. Make sure to see those two topics if you'd like more DevOps topics. A big thanks to all of our sponsors for having me here and having you in the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. So now we have time for questions. We have around 5 minutes, so yeah.
Hey, that was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
So you said that you can actually roll back the deployment.
Yes.
What approach App Veyor takes to roll back the Sitecore items? If you deploy something in the Sitecore and publish it, so how it is going to roll back?
Good question. So I don't think App Veyor does anything. App Veyor is Sitecore agnostic. It's up to you to define a rollback solution for your items. Here, I always deploy on top of my Sitecore instance, so it overwrites everything using Courier. The update package says to overwrite everything. So when I do a rollback, it's just deploying an older artifact that contains the items as well, so it will overwrite everything at the moment. If you want more custom approach for your items, you would have to create custom update package probably and think about it yourself.
So you can, sorry, I don't want to take So can I take a backup of the database and if something happens, or say I create a new database when I'm deploying,
yeah.
I just go back to the previous. Can App Veyor work with SQL Server?
Yeah, you could completely do blue-green deployments using App Veyor if you'd like. So you'd have 2 deployments and conditions on them. So depending on which is blue or green, you deploy on that server, and then you just switch the network load balancer for a rollback, for example.
Hiya.
Hi.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
The rollback question, I just wanted to, if you don't mind, just point everybody towards JammyCam's blog, because maybe less a well-known piece of information is that SUGCON generates a rollback package automatically whenever you use a .8.update package.
Oh.
Creates a rollback package which you can reverse the action which has just been taken.
Yeah.
So you can actually use that in your deploy PS1 to fetch that file and maybe upload it somewhere that you need it. Or
Exact.
Yeah.
So your deploy.ps1 file after installation, it could, with the App Veyor API, upload the zip that contains the rollback package inside the artifacts. So it's all scriptable. There's a complete API for that. So you can store it and roll back to it with a different script, maybe. Yeah. Is there any? Yeah.
Hey, yeah, that was a really good talk. I liked that. I was wondering if you want to be able to, if there's certain scripts that you use quite a lot in your deployments, is there a means in App Veyor of being able to turn those, like, sort of template them so you can just add lines into the YAML file and provide particular variables rather than to have to put in an entire PowerShell script every time? If there was something you wanted to do, can you create as a template that you can use in multiple different projects?
Yes, you can for sure write some PS1 files and put them in your repository to run them using the scripts. Or you can have them in a separate repository. In the init section, you download that repository latest version, and then you use them as is in the. So it's very configurable. You can store them anywhere. You can cache them if you like.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So the question was, did I evaluate other build systems like TeamCity or Jenkins before choosing App Veyor? Yes, I did. My initial work was with TeamCity. I tried to install it with Docker on my machine and have it build the Habitat repository. And I failed within a week. I wasn't able to do the build because the agent always had some software not installed in it. So with TeamCity or Jenkins, you have to provide your own build agent machines or virtual machines. This is where I think App Veyor shines. It gives you the machine with already all the tools you need in it, and you just have to install a few picky things like gulp if you'd like to have it. The question, what about VSTS? I'm not used to VSTS myself. VSTS has a free tier as well with up to 5 users. I think it could be similar to App Veyor in that case. I just stumbled on App Veyor first and I fall in love with it.
How does App Veyor make the deployment on your local machine with the agent? What's the streamline? Because maybe like on this one you don't have a public IP, how it's sending the packages?
Good question. So how does App Veyor knows it has to deploy on my machine if I don't have a static IP? This is the job of the App Veyor agent.exe file that I installed here. It has, if I show it to you quickly, not here. So I will sign in. Oh, it's here. Environment, habitat staging. I have a token here, an access key, and I enter that on my machine. So every time I start my machine, the App Veyor agent contacts the App Veyor server with that key, and it tells I'm online, basically. So, and then it opens a communication and waits for something to be sent to him. Yes?
If you need to release on multiple different solutions, for example, some CD servers and some TM servers, so that you need to deploy different packages, is it possible to configure App Veyor with that?
Yes, it could be possible to deploy on CM and CD with different packages. You would have multiple environments, and one environment for your CM, one per CD, for example, that are configured to the correct addresses. And at the build step, you will just build multiple artifacts, one for the CM and one for the CDs, using scripts as before.
Okay, I think it's time for the last question before we shift rooms.
Sorry, instead of having multiple environments, can I just have one environment with different roles in it? So I've got one environment, for instance, I want to deploy it to probably a QA and a UAT server, but I just want one environment with roles. Can it match up with roles? Can you match roles in the environment?
If I understand the question correctly, it's can you use only one environment to deploy to multiple servers by role? I'm not sure, but sky is the limit here. It's very flexible. You might be able to do it. In my case, I had to add some custom files per environment to patch the target host name. So it's not the same package I want to install in staging and production because the host name doesn't match. So I want separate package, separate artifacts, and separate environments. But if it's the same files and items you want to deploy everywhere, with App Veyor, you can take an artifact and deploy it in a different environment if you'd like. So you can have a production and staging and deploy the same artifact everywhere. Thank you very much for attending my session. If you want to learn more, come talk to me.